All right. Moving on, we've got Eric Lauer. So obviously kind of a breakout year in some ways last year, projected this year for a 1.2 WARP by Pacoda, 389 ERA, but a 448 DRA. So obviously some disparities there. Projected for about 151 innings this year. He is the fourth Brewers starter projected for more than one WARP in Pacoda's 50th percentile projection. So that's notable too. Definitely a good depth piece, but as I mentioned, a really interesting 2022 last year, right? He got off to that really hot start. Very, very good first 2 months before he got just absolutely hammered in June with, I think his ERA in June was close to 7. It was bad, but he ultimately finished the year pretty strong too. So it looks like DRA doesn't seem to be a big believer in him. And I'd be lying too if I said I wasn't a little nervous about some of the stuff that came out, talking about the pitching metrics where apparently Eric Lauer's the best in the league on getting whiffs on middle pitches. And I just don't like pitchers relying on whiffs on middle pitches. But I guess, how do we view him heading into the year? Is he, maybe somebody who could take a step up to that, number 3 level, or do you still kind of see him as a back end piece?
I think he's a very good fourth. I think if you have 3 guys better than him, you are feeling really, really good about your overall rotation situation, which I think we are. Generally feel pretty good about that. His stuff plus is actually below average. So he has a 93 stuff plus, but a 100 location plus. So he is doing a decent job locating the ball, and it all adds up to being a 98. So just a little bit below average, which is not terrible considering, again, this is measuring against all pitchers, not just starters. So if your stuff plus as a starter is a little bit below average, you have to sort of, like the pitching plus, I should say, you have to sort of adjust that up and say, okay, for a starter, that's still pretty solid and pretty good.
As a left-handed starter too, right? Facing so many righties. So I mean, that's
although
solid.
That's just also reality. So, you can't really adjust for it. It's not going to change. I think the thing with Lauer is what Ryan said is correct. He's a really good fourth starter, but I think that the stuff does limit his upside a little bit compared to everybody else, which is, I'd love to be able to sit here and say, he is also young and maybe he'll take a step up, but I'm not sure that there's too much ceiling left here. I suspect that, he will have his good stretches, but get knocked around once in a while when his location's a little off, or his timing's a little off on stuff, because he can get hit hard occasionally. But generally speaking, he's a very good guy to have in the rotation. He takes a lot of innings and he's generally effective doing it. But he's not going to get up into Burns, Woodruff, even Peralta territory. He, I think, kind of is what we've seen him last year, ultimately.
Yeah, he is kind of the classic mid-rotation guy that you want to just sort of be there to eat innings and to take some load off of the bullpen and to lengthen out your bullpen. And that's going to involve, there will be some runs where he is quite good, like we saw early last year. And then there will be some runs where he's, I don't want to say unplayable, but like where you're definitely like, oh, just got his head handed to him. And that's fine. Like it's part of the deal when you're dealing with a mid-rotation starter. They're not going to be just like 6 innings and 3 runs every time out.
Yeah, I think mid-rotation guys get into that trap a little bit once in a while with popular perception, is like, well, he should be giving up like 4 runs a game. And that's not how things work. Like sometimes you give up 1 and sometimes you give up 8. And that variance is just part of how pitching works. So I think, especially last year, people are prone to remember the blow-up times and minimize the good a little bit, and that's just how things go. And he's totally fine, and will be fine this year too.
Well, and the further you get down in the rotation, the more I'm okay with having guys that are kind of like that, where you'll take those starts where they're absolutely dominant because they're likely to win you that game. That is likely to happen. And then you can sort of mitigate and do some things when they get their head handed to them a little bit, when they come out and they're shakier. If you're in a good spot otherwise with your rotation, if everything else is going kind of good, you have a rested bullpen, there are days when you can yank that guy in the 3rd inning and go, he's only given up like 3 runs so far, but he's had runners on base a lot, so we're just going to yank him now. And
it's suitor time, although / whoever is the new suitor, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Yeah. So there's some things you can do to play around with that. So I like the idea that you have a guy who's a little bit more up and down than like steadier. And I think that's also a thing. Like I've always talked about this, that like people think that consistency in baseball is much more of a thing than it really is. There's no player who's truly consistent. Like you get the same performance from them every day or every start or whatever. Everybody has ups and downs. Like you are going to have a roller coaster here. So the idea of consistency is always, it's at least a little bit ephemeral. There are players who are more consistent than others, but nobody's truly like really consistent. There's always ups and downs.